Hi, my name is Jazzy, and welcome back to me talking about movies. And as you can tell by my tree here, it's Christmas time, so it's time to talk about Netflix Christmas movies. Today we're going to be talking about The Princess Switch 3, Romancing the Star.
Merry Christmas from Montanaro. This year we're hosting an international Christmas festival featuring a special visitor all the way from the Vatican.
I present to you the Star of Peace.
Sorry to interrupt, Your Majesty, but we have a bit of a situation.
The Star of Peace is gone. This can't be happening.
As you can tell, this is the third of the Princess Switch movies. And we're back with all three Vanessa Hudgens. There's Stacy, there's Margaret, and there's Fiona. So it might get a little confusing on which Vanessa Hudgens is which, so I'm gonna try and break it down for you. Stacy is the Vanessa with mid-length hair and has an American accent. Margaret is the one with the bob and has a posh British accent. And Fiona is the blonde who talks like she's having an orgasm. And I've made this chart just in case anyone gets confused. Now, the first two movies primarily focused on Stacy and Margaret. Stacy is a former baker from Chicago who is now Princess of Belgravia after marrying Prince Edward. And Margaret is the former Duchess, now Queen of Montanaro, who married Stacy's best friend, Kevin. Now, what makes this movie different is that this movie primarily focuses on Fiona, who is Margaret's cousin, who tried to impersonate her in the last movie. This was most likely done because Stacy and Margaret have already married their respective love interests, and since these movies primarily consist of will they, won't they plots, there's not a lot that can be done with their stories anymore, or at least romantic stories. It also makes sense to focus on Fiona this time because she was the most entertaining character in the last one. Like I said in my review of the last movie, it was very clear Vanessa had a lot of fun playing Fiona, and she's back to hamming it up in this movie.
Good news has arrived. Meow.
Meow to you as well.
So in this movie, Stacy and Margaret are in charge of hosting an international Christmas festival in Montanaro. For the event, they're loaned a relic called the Star of Peace, which is loaned to them by the Vatican of all things. Since it's important and shiny, it is the movie's MacGuffin and immediately gets stolen by thieves. Since the police, of course, are useless, they decide to ask for Fiona's help since she's pretty good at deception. Now, if you remember, Fiona was sentenced to community service at the end of the last movie after impersonating Margaret and kidnapping Stacy, so she's been working at a convent. Fiona decides to help them after Margaret promises to give her a good word at her disciplinary hearing after Christmas so that way she could stop doing community service. Fiona meets up with a man named Peter Maxwell in order to get his help to help find who stole the star. When they meet up, it's pretty obvious that they used to date and they still have feelings for each other. As is the case with these movies, it's about as subtle as a car crash. Since Peter used to work at Interpol, he's able to find out who stole the star, and it turns out it is another one of Fiona's exes named Hunter. Peter comes up with a plan to get Fiona invited to Hunter's holiday party so she can distract him while Peter and Fiona's minions steal the star back. Remember how the biggest thing at stake in the first movie was a baking competition? I guess the natural progression was to make the third movie a heist movie. Not that I mind, of course. The more ridiculous the plot is, the better. And of course, we get to use all the different heist tropes. We even get to have two scenes where people have to go through lasers. And Fiona happens to be really good at that, which allows a good moment of unresolved sexual tension with Peter.
Done.
After Reggie, one of Fiona's minions, gets injured, though, that leaves one less person to help try and grab the jewel. And Fiona's the only one that can help take his place. And of course, since it's a Princess Switch movie, this is where the switch comes in. They decide to have Margaret pretend to be Fiona and distract Hunter, while the real Fiona helps steal the star back. Cue montage of Margaret learning how to act like Fiona. I think they wasted a potential to flesh out Margaret and Fiona's relationship a little bit more. We got some hints in the last movie. We knew that they grew up together, also that Fiona seemed to be a little jealous of Margaret. That's pretty much about it. Would have been nice if maybe we had a little bit more mention of that. I mean, maybe there could have been a moment where Margaret is surprised about some of the things Fiona has done in the past, or even like some of her history with Hunter. Maybe she could have realized, oh wow, I don't really know my cousin that much as I used to. Something like that. We could have even seen the two getting closer together, which is kind of hinted at considering they're spending some time together as Margaret is learning how to be like Fiona. We could have even had Margaret making a comment to Fiona about Fiona rekindling her romance with Peter. She could have even had like a teasing cousin moment. She's like, oh, I see you really like Peter. Or, oh, what's the deal with Peter? You seem really close together and stuff. Something like that, where at least then it also ties in with the romance. And she could have been someone who's on her side, kind of almost like nudging her a little bit, like, hey, maybe you should get back together with Peter. The most we get is her the only time she ever mentions something is when she's talking to Kevin about it, and she just mentions, oh, they're cute together. But it would have been nice to have her say something like that to Fiona herself. We do get a scene where Vanessa Hudgens is dancing with herself in a tango, which is honestly pretty impressive.
Now that's not something you see every day.
Something tells me they really upped up the special effects budget for this movie. Now, of course, it is a Christmas rom-com, so we gotta talk about the romance. As far as love interests go, I do actually like Peter. Like Stacy and Margaret's love interests in the previous movies, they actually have a pre-existing history together, so it's not as weird for them to suddenly be in love with each other. We also get some backstory on their relationship, and even more so on Fiona's past. We find out through flashbacks that Fiona would spend Christmases at boarding school with Peter since both their parents would leave them there, and that's how they formed a bond. It's funny, after all three movies, Fiona is the Vanessa Hudgens character that gets the most fleshed out, which isn't saying much, but still. Vanessa also manages to have some chemistry with Peter's actor, Remy High. Peter also manages to be one of the more charismatic love interests in the trilogy, especially compared to Edward. Speaking of Edward, he actually manages to have a little bit more of a personality in this movie. Of course, that personality consists of him being a doofus.
He's a goat.
Greatest of all time, babe. It's like a sports thing.
I knew that. I knew that.
I mean, is it just me, or has he gotten dumber in each movie? Especially in this one.
We need a person who actually thinks like a criminal, who has a history of never considering consequences, and has absolutely no fear of breaking the rules.
How do we knew someone like that?
I mean, I know he had to be pretty dumb, especially in the last movie, considering he wasn't able to tell which Vanessa Hudgens is his wife, but still. I mean, he's pretty much just used in this movie to make really dumb jokes of not understanding certain references. When you compare him to the first movie, it's kind of hard to believe they're the same character. In the first movie, Edward was so stiff, it was kind of hard to believe that Stacy even fell for him in the first movie. I mean, Kevin really doesn't have a lot to do in this movie. In fact, he's absent through most of it because he has to go pick up Olivia from ballet school. Luckily, he does come back in time to give us a reaction to seeing all three Vanessa Hudgens, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
We're back! Merry Christmas!
What's going on?
I can explain everything.
During the heist, a wrench is thrown in when Fiona's disciplinary board is moved up to that very night. What were the odds of that happening? I guess the higher ups in Montenegro don't care to spend Christmas Eve with their families. Of course, this is the same country that decided to schedule a coronation on Christmas Day. Since Fiona's busy with the heist, Stacy decides to dress up as Fiona and pretend to be her for the disciplinary committee. Good thing Fiona brought extra wigs. And despite Stacy trying to extend Fiona's sentence, she actually manages to get it revoked. So good news for Fiona.
Everything His Royal Highness says is true. I've made some hideous mistakes. In fact, if you need to extend my sentence, I completely understand. Actually, I recommend it.
She doesn't mean that.
Oh, but I do.
No, you don't.
I do.
No, you don't.
I do.
No, you don't.
I think we've had enough.
Despite a few hiccups during the heist, they are able to steal the star back. Fortunately, it looks like Peter did his own switch and stole the star himself.
Fiona? What is it?
However, he only did this so that way he can get Fiona to go see her mother so they can possibly reconcile. Throughout the movie, Fiona was kept getting calls from her mother that she was ignoring, and Peter kept insisting that she go see her. So even though Fiona doesn't want to see her mom, she does eventually go to meet up with her. To be honest, it's actually a pretty effective scene. Although Vanessa wasn't always really good at emoting earlier in her career, she actually does a pretty good job expressing Fiona's anger and hurt towards her mother's neglect. I think there was a lot of help from Fiona's mother's actress, Amanda Donahue, who is an English actress with a lot of credits. Fiona's mom apologizes for constantly abandoning her daughter and asks for her forgiveness. I do have some issues with this scene and pretty much the whole storyline of Fiona's estrangement with her mother. Fiona is pretty much just expected to forgive her mother for essentially abandoning her every Christmas as a child, even though it clearly affected her. And the only explanation we get for Fiona's mother constantly abandoning her is that she mentions that Fiona's father was very cruel to her. I don't know if I completely buy that as a good reason to constantly leave your kid at a boarding school for every year at Christmas. I mean, Fiona even mentions that she never even gave her Christmas presents. They keep saying, oh, you never know how much time you have left with your loved one, which I get, that is true. You never know how much time you have left with people, but that's not really a good reason to forgive someone, especially for that reason. And they mentioned that, and I was kind of almost expecting for there to be a reveal of Fiona's mom to be dying of cancer or something, or some kind of disease.
I got the results of the test back. I definitely have breast cancer.
But, I mean, clearly that's not it. Her mother looks fine. It doesn't look like she has the standard movie sickness on her, so I don't know why she's expected to forgive her. And I'm not saying you have to forgive someone only if they're dying. She doesn't really have to forgive her for all, but she doesn't even give a good, it just seems kind of messed up to expect someone to forgive someone just because, well, they could be dead tomorrow, or, oh, they could be dead in a few years, even though, her mom just says, oops, sorry. I just don't know if that's a good, like I said, just don't know if that's a good reason to forgive someone, even if they're family. You don't have to forgive someone just because they're family. And I probably would have had less of a problem with this storyline if Margaret was a little bit more involved in it. In the previous movies, there were mentions of Margaret's parents dying as a child, so it would have probably been an interesting parallel to Fiona's relationship with her parents, since she's estranged with her mother and her father died due to a peanut allergy. They could have had Margaret, along with Peter, push Fiona to try and forgive her mother. Could have had Margaret say something along the lines of, I wish I could see my mother again, or if only I had more time with my mother. That could have also fit in with the theme of, you never know how much time you have left. I'm not saying it would have been a better reason, but it would have worked thematically with the movie. So once again, could have used it to flesh out more of Margaret and Fiona's relationship. For example, in the scene where Fiona is confronting her mother about how she abandoned her as a child, she could have mentioned something along the lines of, Margaret was the only one who would send me Christmas presents every year, or she was the only one who ever seemed to care about me, or could have even said something along the lines of, Margaret would always invite me every year for Christmas, so I could have spent Christmas with her, but I always said no because I always hoped you would come back and change your mind. And it just would have been another way to add some texture to Margaret and Fiona's relationship, because they're cousins. You would think there would be a little bit more to it. It also could have been another reason why Fiona was so willing to help Margaret and wanted to spend Christmas with her. It was to make up for the lost times she and Margaret could have spent Christmas together as a child. There's kind of this running thing where Peter keeps saying to Fiona, you're always pushing people away, just like your mother pushed you away, and that kind of thing. And maybe they could have done something like that with Margaret too. Maybe it could have been that Margaret was always trying to get close to Fiona and Fiona would push her away, and then that's why, and then later on Fiona was trying to get close to Margaret again, and then by that time Margaret was just kind of sick of trying to be close with her, and that would explain why in the second movie why Margaret wasn't super happy to see Fiona, aside from her just being a complete ham. Anyway, after initially rebuffing her mother's attempt to reconcile, Fiona does go back and forgives her mother, and they decide to take the star back to Stacy and Margaret, just in time to stop them from getting in trouble with the Vatican. That's a weird sentence. Just weird that the Vatican is involved at all in this whole thing. Also, Star Piece, honestly, it's just a tree topper. It's a glorified tree topper. Anyway, after they're all back together, they all go to the Christmas festival that Stacey and Margaret worked so hard to make possible. And to be honest, it just seems to be a very underwhelming event. It doesn't really look that much different from the Christmas events earlier in the movie. It's just that everyone's dressed a little fancier and wearing crowns. Either way, Peter comes back to reconcile with Fiona and they get together. There's also an offhand mention of Hunter getting arrested by the police, but since that's not as important as seeing Vanessa Hudgens kiss all three of her love interests, they didn't need to film that. Of course, the movie ends, but don't worry, the end credits give us a dance scene, which gave me When in Rome flashbacks. Okay, so I have a lot of thoughts. I'm glad none of the storylines had Stacey and Margaret getting pregnant. Not that I'm opposed to pregnancy, it's just very typical of the genre. I mean, as wild as the heist plot goes, at least it's a little bit more interesting than a pregnancy.
I'm pregnant.
So am I. With twins.
So am I. What?
Once again, not opposed to pregnancy, I have plenty of pregnant friends. I'm sad that there wasn't a fourth Vanessa Hudgens in this movie. I'm kind of let down about that. I mean, half the fun of these movies is to have Vanessa Hudgens interact with herself and try and attempt another accent. I mean, I was hoping we'd at least see one towards the end of the movie. I mean, I would have been fine to see a cameo from Vanessa Hudgens' character from A Night Before Christmas, which I still haven't seen, by the way. It would have topped Amber and Richard's cameo from the last movie. I will give these movies some credit. They are pretty good at continuity. I rewatched the previous two movies and I will say they do keep things pretty consistent. For example, it actually makes sense for Olivia to be away at a ballet academy since in the first movie, the reason why Stacey agreed to switch with Margaret in the first place was so that way Margaret could help Olivia get a scholarship to a summer ballet academy. I will give the movie some credit that compared to other Christmas rom-coms, this is definitely one of the more diverse ones, at least when it comes to the main characters. I mean, now with the addition of Peter, Edward's the only white male love interest in the movie trilogy. In this movie, it's confirmed that Stacey is Filipina, just like Vanessa Hudgens is in real life.
Hey, my family's from the Philippines. We do hugs.
Although it's not really clear if that's the same case for Margaret and Fiona. In the flashback scenes, younger Fiona is played by an Asian actress, but Fiona's mother is white. I mean, it's possible that Fiona's father was maybe Asian or Filipino. I mean, she and Margaret could be mixed race like Vanessa Hudgens is in real life, but it's not super clear. I mean, I guess it's good that they don't really comment on it, and I could just be paying more attention than it really should be necessary. Overall, I think it was a fun addition to the Princess Switch movies. I think it was a good idea to make the focus about Fiona because once again, she is the best character out of all of them. I do hope Vanessa Hudgens plays more characters like her because honestly, it's nice to see her have a good time. I also think it's a pretty fitting end for the Princess Switch movies. I mean, if they turn out to have another movie, I'm gonna be watching, but if this is the last one, I think we'll be fine. Anyway, let me know what you thought about the movie. Do you think they should have had another Vanessa Hudgens? If they did have another Vanessa Hudgens, what accent should she have? Anyway, just make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.